We are live. My name is Dr. Tova Goldfein. I often forget to say my name. This is TMS Roundtable, recovery, chronic pain, autoimmune disease. More important than me, my name, my show. I am always so happy to be here. I get to sit across some amazing people. And, I'm just one blessed human being. Enough about me. My guest tonight is, one second, I want to put up your name. Hold on, I'm doing my producing job. Inviting the listeners to be patient with Doc Tova. Here you go. Okay, great. Seth Lorinczi. It's a beautiful name. Seth, how do I pronounce your last name?
Lorinczi.
Lorinczi. It's a beautiful, beautiful name. Really has a nice flow. It's a nice stage name. I love to tell people from hello how I met you. And I would never have met you if I hadn't been colleagues and friends with Michael Galinsky, who is the author, as the director, main character of All the Rage, and an amazing movie about Dr. John Sarno, whose work I'm very involved in, and I help people heal chronic pain and autoimmune symptoms. Did you know that Michael Galinsky was going to name the movie All the Awareness? But he didn't think it was going to take he knew all the right, but it is about awareness, and we talked about that. It's about awareness. So just off the record, Seth, I am thrilled to meet you again because I was on the show with Michael Galinsky, and he said, Tova, I'm bringing a guest. I'm like, okay, Michael. He said, you've got to meet Seth. I'm like, does he have pain? Is something wrong with him? Then bring him on. He said, no. And I thought, okay, I'm going to trust you, Michael. And it was an amazing broadcast. And then I'm having you back for myself. But I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so I am very excited because this is not usual. This is not a usual topic because of my experience, but I thought, let me jump into the little bit of not so comfortable zone and learn and be a little uncomfortable with maybe the topic, because I know the topic is so important for people with chronic pain and disease. It might not be direct, but there's so much here, so many treasures that people need. And after I started to read your book, Death Trip, I knew it was for my clients directly, indirectly. And I always say there's no specific way to heal. There's the beginning, middle, and end, and how you get there and what your journey is will be your journey. And if this broadcast can help people, then Seth, we've done our job. If we can just reach out to people that are struggling and need support and inspiration, that's what this book is doing for a lot of people. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to try not to interrupt, but I interrupt when I get nervous or I get excited. So I want to hear from you briefly, maybe like just you met Michael, but that you can fit that in because everybody knows and loves Michael Galinsky. But tell us about your healing journey and this amazing book. And again, I'm just so happy that you're spending an hour with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tova. It's an honor for me. I'm thrilled. And it's funny. I spent about a month in Israel 2006, and that was a really life-changing trip.
Wow.
I'd never been before, and as you know from reading the book, my family was totally severed from Jewishness. We were totally cut off from a heritage, and I understand why in a lot of ways. I think my father and my grandparents were doing the best they could without a lot of tools. And yet going to Israel and experiencing it for myself, the beauty and the contradictions and the strange feeling of belonging somewhere that I'd never been before really, really touched me. So, in talking with you, I'm getting all these mental images. It's mental images. Honestly, it's smells. It smells of ancient dirt streets that have baked under the sun for thousands of years. The
Yeah.
smell of open air markets.
Wow.
It's the smell of uh, grilling meats.
It's
There's all
still very third world here. It's still very third world in many ways.
well, a friend of mine who preceded me to Israel described it as a third world country with first world advertising, which I thought was kind of cutting.
I
But
mean, we Israelis have made ways. Where would the world be without ways? You know.
yeah. But to the book and also to Michael as well. I think the funny thing about Michael, and you know him well, we've never met. We came from the same music scene at the same time. We were probably, maybe, possibly in the same room a couple times. We never met. And it's interesting that we both came to this point in our lives having done projects, All the Rage and Death Trip, that feel like they're in a very, very explicit conversation with one another.
Yeah.
And it's funny, when I do these book talks, I often mention the movie, just sort of throwing it out there. Does anyone know about this? And with no exception, every time I do, a few hands go up in the audience and people will say, Saved by Sarno.
Seth, the book
it's
is in
everywhere.
30 languages. I mean, the book is in 30 languages. The book was written, it says it in the movie. His wife says,
Yeah.
Go to the bookshelf. The book is in 30 languages.
Yeah. It's everywhere. And I think, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes in terms of Sarno himself and his story and the poignance of that movie, because it really is the story of it's the story of what he stumbled across and his insights.
Yeah.
But of course, it's also the story of someone
Yeah.
who was never recognized and never got the sort of the sense of belongingness that we get when we're in conversation with people who see what we're seeing and can reflect that back to us.
And Seth, I would like to say that, and Michael talks about this in the movie, and Michael talks about this openly. His parents came from Europe. His grandparents came from Europe. He's got intergenerational trauma. It's out there in the movie.
Yep.
And he was with me in Israel. He'd come from Italy. He was promoting his mall book, and he'd come to Israel. And we showed the movie here in a few places, and that's when his mother actually got sick and passed away that next week. So and he writes beautifully about his mother and his father and the relationship and the struggle with him and his father, and and so I imagine the two of you can relate to that, because let's put it this way, we all have intergenerational trauma. Even if you come from the good home, our parents did the best we could. I'm a grandmother. We are all doing the best we can. It's really what our experiences, how we perceive it. And this is your book. How do you want to incorporate it and integrate it into your life? So please share now about the book. And
so, the short version of the book is 7-8 years ago ish. I was in middle age. I was in my middle 40s, and everything fell apart. I thought I had reached this plateau in terms of stability and security, but there was nothing underneath it. I had a very middling career, if you could call it that, as a musician, as a composer, and a recording engineer. I wasn't really getting anywhere, and I was not facing that fact. Even more dire, my family, my marriage was breaking up. I felt estranged from my wife. I couldn't connect with her, or more truthfully, she could not connect with me. And I felt very distant from our daughter, who was about 10 at that time. We entered therapy to manage the process of breaking up, basically to make it easy and humane, especially for our kid. And over the course of a couple more or less ordinary sessions, at one point, the therapist, who's named Renee in the book, not her real name, very innocently suggested, would you like to try a session under the influence of MDMA? And I was not aware that was a service she offered, or that it
And
was legal.
the purpose to be?
Well, the point being here, actually, I'll get there. We had the session, the first of 3 sessions with MDMA, and you've never experienced that yourself. I'm intuiting. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this. MDMA is not a traditional psychedelic. It's not like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. You don't typically see visions. You don't sort of astrally travel. Chemically, it's actually an amphetamine, believe it or not, but it has this very interesting effect. One of the things it promotes is called fear memory extinction, meaning that it's very easy to go back and revisit painful or traumatic memories in a neutral way.
Wow.
You're not reintroducing yourself to the, well, let me back that up. You are reintroducing yourself to the trauma, but you're not feeling it as a traumatic event. You have distance from it and you have perspective on it. And that's why it's so important and so effective for people suffering from PTSD, from sexual assault. As I mentioned, as we were chatting earlier, Israel is at the very cutting edge. There's a lot of programs working with IDF, former IDF personnel, for instance. There's a big conference in Israel at the end of the month. You're at the very leading edge.
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. Also with cannabis as well. I mean, we could go into that. But here's the thing.
Tel Aviv was also the vegan capital of the world.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Who would have thought?
Well, I mean, actually, that's interesting, though. I mean, because I'm a former food writer. I'm not sure if that shines through in the book, but I'm very interested in food history and cultural history.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think about what happens, like what grows and what animals live in that region. And it's not a ton of dairy. Cows do not thrive there generally.
Yeah. So interesting.
So what do you have to work with?
And where else would you want to be but where Jesus and Moses and Allah was born? I mean, this is the place to have it all.
Well, yes.
That was a commercial break.
Okay, yeah, good. Right. It's complicated, but yes.
Anyway. So go ahead. So Renee suggested this. And again, I do want to preface for the listeners. At this point in your life, you were not in so much physical pain, but you were an enormous emotional. You were like hanging out with your fear, your shame. You were full of guilt in the book, full of guilt, full of enormous, deep emotions that for so many of my clients, it's all reflecting in everything from migraines to autoimmune symptoms from A to Z to back pain to neck pain that has nothing to do with the disc. And these people are so struggling. And then when we figure out, we know about the emotions, it's even just been studied now, the neuroplasticity, the brain living in fight or flight. It's more that you were at the point with your fight and flight brain that you couldn't go into your parasympathetic nervous system. You were living in a state of angst. Maybe we can just preface that because you were not having pain per se.
I'd say 2 things about that. One, a therapist here who actually works with psychedelics introduced me to she broadened the concept of fight or flight. That's the classic way we frame it. There's also freeze.
Yes.
And there's also fawn.
Right.
And I know you're partway through the book right now. As you get closer to the end, and the last third of the book takes place in Hungary, you will see a very vivid example of the fawn response.
What is the fawn? Can you explain that from your point of view, the fawn response?
Fawning is appeasing. It's taking on the behavior or the appearance or the identity of an oppressor. It is I liken it to a kind of hiding response, but it's somewhat more nuanced than that.
Wow.
And without dispensing any spoilers, like I said, you will find a very vivid and actually, I would say, kind of gut-wrenching example of how that works in real life.
Wow.
The thing I'd say about physical pain, and we chatted a little bit about this before we began as well. Right, I was not in physical pain. I was in psychic agony. I was ruled by fear, and as you say, by shame and guilt. I had no way to connect with this. And I want to be really clear. Your work is addressing physical pain and autoimmune disorders. Personally, I see essentially no difference between that kind of existential angst, sadness, anxiety, et cetera, and physical symptoms. I don't think there's really a difference. It's just a question of what routes those energies take
Beautiful.
in our bodies and our minds and our hearts. As I was saying to you before we began, I actually went through the digital manuscript last night, and I looked for instantiations, pardon me, of the word pain. I found 69 of them, and the book is 256 pages.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pain in the book.
Yeah.
And interestingly, a lot of it occurs in my father's memoirs. Throughout the book, there's a dialogue.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the book, around the same time I began MDMA therapy, I stumbled upon my father's memoirs. He wrote about 20 pages a year or two before he died, and I had to browbeat them out of him. He absolutely did not want to revisit his past. But I said, well, I'm going to need this. And I didn't know how right I was. So
Wow.
throughout the book, there's this dialogue where he's sharing stories from his upbringing, and I'm responding to them. And what I'm seeing is, it gave me a data trail that I could pursue, and eventually I do, all the way back to Hungary. But also, I saw where he was turning away, where he was unable to face or to even name what he grew up with, which was he grew up in Hungary in the 1930s as the country was moving closer and closer to Germany's orbit.
Right.
Yeah.
So your dad sure had TMS with his earaches and he had the earaches, or you had the earaches?
We both did.
Both did, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, the way this stuff manifests, to me, is kind of arbitrary or even immaterial. I mean, the question is, how do we engage with it? And, many people listening will think psychedelics are not for them, or a total turnoff, or they have, there's no possible intersection with their lives. And what I would say is that's more or less how I felt as well. I had admittedly experienced as a teenager with psychedelics, but I'd come to the conclusion that they were not really suited for an adult making his way in the world, and I'd forgotten about them. What they do, and what that first MDMA session that I detail in the book, all that gave me was a chance to step outside the stories I told about myself, that I told about my wife, and how we related to one another. All it was perspective. It just gave us a little bit of breathing room. And as I was saying earlier, it's so hard to have perspective on your own life. I mean, so much what we do, I would say in the 90 percentile of each day is more or less automatic. We know where we're supposed to be. We know what our work is. We know how to cook a meal. And we're not really questioning those things. And that's how we stay functional. I get it. But to get the opportunity to truly pull over and get some perspective on the things that you thought were immutable is a real gift. And once my wife and I saw that we were living out these stories and that they might not be true, there was no way to unsee it. And that's what started this whole ball of yarn unraveling, and eventually leads me back to Hungary to find out, well, what happened? What
Right.
really happened to my family there?
Wow. 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 And I do want to say, just on the topic, that I think all of us therapists are finding with our clients that they just want to know themselves. They just want some sense of truth. They just want the truth. They want, Michael and Galinsky and I, we talk a lot about on many broadcasts, it always comes down to the knowledge of self. And he'll always say, well, we all have this disease called being human. He kids about that. And, you can't heal a body you hate. And
Yeah.
how many of us are hating our body and hating, and you're not going to get past go with the
No.
hate. There has to be a love, and like loving your cancer and loving your fibromyalgia. I mean, I know it sounds trivial, but your body is speaking to you.
Yeah.
And so this is a whole nother topic, but so go ahead. So continue.
Well, I want to put a pin in that, because you really need to meet my wife,
Yeah.
Juliana, who is, trust me, far wiser than I am. And she's a coach, and she works with people to help integrate psychedelic experiences. Like they have these experiences, and then she helps them work them into their lives. And one of the many profound things she said to me, and she's suffered autoimmune stuff, physical pain.
Yes, she was going through the naturopath,
exactly.
and doing all this stuff in the book, and whoa, yeah.
But what she said at a certain point, and what she tells many of her clients, is, would it be okay if your pain was loving you? And that's so profound and so counterintuitive for many people. But eventually, I believe, and in my own experience, you can get to a place of non-duality in which this is not a judgment. This is not the world telling you you were put here to suffer, but there is a message and a gift in that. And it's funny. I was mentioning there's a section in the book in which I talk about my childhood earaches, which felt like a curse. Just like my father before me, around the age of probably 3 or 4, I started to have these terrible, terrible all-night earaches. And eventually I had a bunch of surgeries done on my ears.
Wow.
But there was also a gift embedded in that. And you've talked about, I think, your very last broadcast, right?
Using pain as your superpower.
Yeah. There's gifts in that. The other thing I wanted to say is, a moment ago, you said that what we want is the truth. And that hits me on a deep level, but I think there's at least one stage, if not several, that come before then. And here's why I say that. When I started publishing about psychedelics, I have a Substack, which has been running since before the book came out and continues now. When I started publishing about psychedelics and what I was learning there, first of all, I felt very nervous because I felt I was outing myself, and that a bunch of people, or my family, for instance, would think, well, see, we knew he was crazy. As it turned out, anyone who knew me was like, yeah, of course that guy's doing that, big deal. But what I got was a flood of people, some of whom I knew and some of whom I didn't, writing me and saying, help me find these medicines, help me find guides who can take me through these experiences, because I feel anxiety and I don't want to. And what I would say to them is, well, first of all, of course, I'll help you find whatever I can. That's difficult because most of this work is, of course, underground. But here's the thing. Anxiety is not a problem in and of itself. It's an animal response. That's how we deal with threat. And it is what, at earlier times in our development, kept us alive, like on a species level.
100%.
So for me, the question is, how are we relating to that anxiety? Are we exiling it? Are we shaming it? Are we stuffing it down below? I mean, in the simplest terms, this book is all about what happens when trauma and anxiety are shoved beneath, and what happens to the people who suffered them, and what happens to the generations that follow. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Wow. You make it so, you really, what I love about your talking and your book is that
I want to sidebar.
you're able to what?
Sidebar. That's not me. That's my dad.
Oh my God, it is your dad. I will talk about the title in a minute, but
Yeah.
you have a, I always say to the listeners, I say to them, I guess, just talk on the third grade. Cause like I
Yeah.
solved my way through chiropractic school. I'm not highly, I mean, I'm smart, but like, I like things simple. I like things basic. I don't want to, and so I'm saying to you, you also, even now, the communication is very inviting and engaging, and we have a way, you have a gift, and I really appreciate it because this is not an easy topic. It's got a lot of tentacles, and yet our world, all over the world, we're looking for ways to come close to ourselves. We don't have to do it hidden in a basement. We can do it with our therapists. We can do it with support. We can do it. Many people can do this without MMDA.
MDMA, for instance. Yeah.
MMDA. This is not. We're not saying you have to do this. I won't do this.
No.
I have enormous intergenerational trauma, and I'm not going to do it because I'm resilient and I'm working it out my way. And I just showed a movie to 100 people on a Zoom called Facing Fear. 25 experts talked about facing fear. Like I find, but we have to face it. We have to face our, and what you're saying is the general basis of all this work in the neuroplastic world, in the John Sarno world, in the mind-body world. It's about coming home. It's about knowing yourself. It's about understanding the mind and the body are intimately connected, says John Sarno, that you do need to walk the road from your conscious mind to your unconscious mind, from your heart, your brain to your heart. Love Heals, which is another movie I promote with, but what you're saying is that however you can do that, this is the way out. And this was your way, and you were brought to it the way you were brought to it. It was like, to me, that was your journey. That was your healing journey. This is your healing journey.
And here's something else I would say about psychedelics too. And one of their great gifts is that they're entirely impersonal, meaning they're just a different lens through which we can look at our experience and try to make sense of it. And especially for people who have undergone trauma and feel perhaps that the world is not a loving place or that there's no place in it for them, psychedelics help us understand the cosmic view, right? The God's eye view, it's sometimes called. That there is a design to this. And so, for instance, I can look back at my own experience being raised in part by Holocaust survivors, the family tragedy that befell me when I was 4 years old, which, no spoilers, it's in the book, that maybe there's a design to this and maybe there's a purpose to it. And we're not being put on earth to be punished, but for some greater purpose. And my greater purpose was, as soon as I started writing this book, or as soon as it started writing me, I understood that it might be a beacon for people who felt they didn't belong to their lives. And it's a really sweet gift to me to get notes back from the world. Again, some from people I know and some I don't, saying, I see myself in this story. The other thing I want to say, I don't really touch on this in the book. In the Western world, the concept of the shaman is it's complicated. Yeah. I think the word appropriation comes up for good reason. When I think of a shaman, I think of a white guy with a ponytail, wearing white clothes, leading people in an ayahuasca ceremony, for instance. But I like to think in archetypes, as Carl Jung did. And the shaman is a very ancient human archetype. It's a storyteller, but it's a transmuter. It is someone who, for whatever reason, often by trauma or illness, is separated from their tribe at an early age, and thus loses something, but also gains something. Gains something to be a translator and a storyteller and a transmuter of other people's illnesses. And that's why in some indigenous cultures, people go to see a shaman because they're ill and they need the shaman to take on the illness and move it through.
Wow. Yeah.
And here's the thing about a shaman. Don't get me wrong, it's not a title I claim in any way, but there's something so beautifully ordinary about it, because we all have that gift and we all have that possibility of telling our stories, but also listening to others and helping them move through their pain. I don't think it's much more complicated than that.
First of all, it's chemical. It's chemical. When you call and make a doctor's appointment, people feel better. This is chemical. It's chemical. When the placebo is chemical, the nocebo is chemical. It's chemical when you are speaking to people through your book. They are healing. I mean, we are chemical beings, and we're relationship beings. So we're continually having relationship with the words. With this is it. And then we haven't even. I mean, a few weeks ago, he's actually an Israeli living in California. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's a sound healer. Mm-hmm. And we had this amazing, of course, conversation about the rice, changing the rice, and then the water moving and the blood changing, because I'm speaking to the blood. And then with my daughter, we cut a lemon into two, and we spoke love words and hate words. And the lemon with hate words had mold, and the one with love had nothing. And I was like, the FUCKING lemon has energy. I couldn't believe it. And I saw the power of my words, energy, chemical changes, neurological changes. This is, so we're back to basics. We're back to like, what was medicine? The doctor would go into, Maimonides would go, and Rambam, would go into the garden, and they would take herbs and put it into tea, and you would heal because he cared about you. So whatever the shaman's doing, doing, okay.
So I punched out of mass media decades ago. I stopped watching TV. I don't go to movies. I don't do any of that stuff. Very rarely, if ever. And years ago, there was some show about ancient Rome. Maybe it was just called Rome. I have no idea. But I remember like a commercial or some ad for it sort of flashed across my consciousness years ago. And it's a scene of a Roman doctor, physician, counseling some noble person how they should cure their malady. And he says very seriously, and if the symptoms persist, sacrifice a white rabbit. It seems to help. And I just thought that was so funny and so strange. And there's also truth in it too, because prayer, I'm not a religious person, but as a result of these experiences in psychedelics, I'm absolutely a spiritual person, as are we all at some level.
Yeah.
These things do have meaning. I also want to say this too. I don't know how the general populace of Israel, if you can classify them into one bucket, would feel about this. But look, I was born in 1971 in the States to an upper middle class Jewish family who basically couldn't admit they were Jewish. And religion was nowhere, spirituality was nowhere, science was our God, materialism was our God. And ritual, such as it was, had totally been banished. I mean, cast out of the kingdom. I was not born into a family that would have had a bar mitzvah anyway. But I think for even people like Richard Alpert / Ram Dass, his take on it was, well, I think the word he used was, my bar mitzvah was empty. It was hollow. There was no power. Any power, transformative power of the ritual had been just utterly cleansed from it. And so that's where I'm coming from. That's my baseline. There is no God. There is no spirit. science will conquer everything. And
Yeah.
now it's humbling to find myself at this stage in my life and recognize maybe all the things we forgot in the decades and the centuries since have real power, much more than we gave them credit for.
Well, I'm sure we could do a whole show and talk about the quantum, which I call it the quantum, which is a very enormous healing power. And, the Joe Dispenza work and the Bruce Lipton work. I mean, some of the doctors I work with are like, Tova, it's a little bit, woo woo. And I'm like, but everyone knows that there's a part of woo woo that's the part of medicine. So I think, I tend to agree to disagree, because I like science. But I'm not black and white. I'm a bit gray, but I do see, look, I've come from a place after the past 4 years of meeting people that healed everything from cancer to MS to chronic pain to trauma and anxiety and stress and PTDS that you've never, you can't even believe. And, and that has nothing to do with my even living here in Israel. And just knowing the possibilities, and the possibilities come from your thoughts, and your thoughts can heal you and help you or harm you and hurt you. And the thoughts are energy. So we're really back to the quantum, the energy world.
Yeah.
And you want to call it God, you want to call it quantum, you want to call it Buddha. It doesn't matter to me. Is there a divine creator? This is not what this show is about, but for people who want to believe in it, that belief is healing. That belief is chemical. So we're back to, And you had, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, to tack on to what I said earlier about the psychedelic experience, there is a lawfulness to it. Again, for those of us who feel, as I did for most of my life, that this was kind of all a mistake, that bad things had happened for no reason and I was being punished. There is a cosmic lawfulness. Like, this is simply how things work on a physical and energetic, a spiritual plane. It doesn't really matter how you define it. But that belief that there is a lawfulness to our experience, and that we're not here to be punished or to be hurt or to be traumatized, but simply to recognize what is a huge relief and a huge gift.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you know the author Paul Levy?
What did he write?
Well, he's best known for a series of books on a concept called Wetiko. And Wetiko is a Native American word, and it basically means the mind virus, like the unconscious, and in his words, evil that we transmit and share out of fear, out of being suffering from ancestral trauma, for instance. And it's why people like Donald Trump can be elected, or quite probably reelected here in this country.
Well, let's just say that, let's just label that statement with that, anybody who wants to be president of any country has to be a traumatized child.
Yeah.
Can we say that? And can we just leave it as be? Because, I've lost friends over Corona politics.
Oh, sure. But the reason I bring up Paul lives in Portland. He's a friend of mine, and he was kind enough to write one of the blurbs on the back of the book.
Yeah.
He also wrote a book called The Quantum Revelation, and basically he's a lifelong Jungian, a Tibetan Buddhist. He's linking those spiritual practices and that language of archetype with quantum physics. I mean, it really is no different. So when you mentioned quantum earlier, I had to sort of tack that on.
No, please look. It's, what I like hearing your story is that you weren't tripping. You didn't go on a trip. You actually, I kept thinking he's writing about his experience. He's actually going home after hours of being in this other, part of his being, and going back to his memories and coming home and writing about it. So this is a very different kind of plant.
Well, look, my aim with the book was to be a translator. I was having these experiences in the underground, as were dozens of people all around me, and of course hundreds and thousands all across the world. I also want to point out there is an ayahuasca circle that has been meeting, I think, for years now, that the participants are Israelis and Palestinians, and they're meeting together in this space.
I'm not surprised.
No,
I'm
not at all.
There's there's 3% of the Muslim culture that's that's extreme. I hug Ahmad every day at the gym. Calls me Motek, which means sweetheart. I said, Ahmad, if we just could have everyone like you, it's like Tovala. So we're talking about a few percentage, and they always say like the few percentage is. So we're not here to discuss that, because we're just here. No. And the one thing I want to bring up, and I'll bring it up every show, because if anyone wants to watch The One Field, it's called The One Field. It's free on YouTube. It was filmed, happened to be filmed in Israel by an Israeli. It was a coincidence, but she's talking about the power of words and prayer. And there's all these experts in it and they even did a retreat here in Israel in the desert. And they showed scientifically the effect of prayer and thoughts. And they were showing, like, I think it was like one of the intifadas, and they were showing what happened. And the death rate came down, and people were meeting and loving, and they were showing this was science, and they showed this little vial of blood, and there was a certain kind of singing, and it changed the blood, and the person healed. I was like, this is not new age, this is in all of us. So if we're here lifting the spirits and talking about, you can believe what you want to believe, we can agree to disagree and not have a war. And this is the way our world is, your world and my world is. But there's a part of our world that's run by the ego, and it's out of control. And I think we can affect that. Me and you are affecting that. I didn't write a book, but it's my life.
But that's your work.
People heal. And it's funny because I'm healing myself. I'm not selfless,
Well, of course, no.
But
you have to.
It's important for us to, because I think you are on the cusp of being an amazing healer for your next career. And we can work together.
Well, if only I could stop writing, I'd actually get somewhere. But unfortunately, I seem to keep doing it.
But I would love to know. I'm always like a little bit like, why this? Just like All the Rage. I didn't understand All the Rage for a while, the name of the movie, and why this title? Why? Could have been a couple things.
Yeah. Well, so when the book was almost finished, so for years, the book had a different title. The book was called Fatherland. And when I stumbled across it, I had one of those moments, it was a eureka moment. Like, this is it. This is it. Because the book is, it's about many things, but it is about finding my father after his death.
Wow.
And I think the dedication says, for my father, may it grant his soul some peace.
Yeah.
Because he is a restless ghost.
Wow.
And I think the beautiful thing for me is that I feel like as though I did. And at the very end of the book, where you'll be in some days.
No, I read the end a lot. I read the end already.
Oh, yeah, don't do that.
I'm that kind of reader.
Is I feel like my undergoing this journey decades after his death did give him some peace. I believe that very firmly.
Oh yeah.
But here's the thing. So the book was called Fatherland, and I was very excited. I felt like that was the perfect title. There was a gravitas to it. It was memorable. And then last May 2023, a book called Fatherland came out. And look, you can't copyright a book title. I still could have used it, but it would have been dumb, especially because the real Fatherland is written by a New Yorker staff writer named Burkhard Bilger. And it's an incredible book. I cannot recommend it enough. He goes back to Germany to find his grandfather's story, because as it turns out, Bilger is American born. his grandfather lived basically on the French-German border down in the South. And he was many things. He was a schoolmaster. He was a music teacher.
Wow.
He was a father and a grandfather, obviously. And he was an official in the Nazi Party.
Wow.
So Bilger is going back and trying to untangle all these threads. Like, who was he? What did he stand for? And what's in me? Right? Anyway, Fatherland gets taken, and Death Trip, it's an edgy title, and a lot of people react negatively to it, which I'm fine with, by the way. Basically, a lot of people describe the psychedelic experience as the death before death, because there is what some people call an ego death, a dissolution.
Oh, I like that. I would have understood. Yeah.
Of our identity.
Yeah.
And that's one reason I should point out that numerous studies, especially one by Johns Hopkins here in the States, show the efficacy of using psychedelics for people with life-threatening or terminal illnesses, and what perspective and relief it gives them in coming to terms with their fate. It's highly, highly effective at this.
Wow.
So for me, the book is a death. I mean, it is those psychedelic experiences I detail, but it's also about dropping the facade of my own identity, which was not serving me and which was keeping me separate from those I loved most, my wife and my daughter, my friends and my community. That part of me had to die in order to uncover what was beneath and to go on this quest back to Hungary to find out what really happened to those people, many of whom, as you know, from as far as you've gotten, do die. And incredibly, many of whom, my father, my aunt, my grandparents, survived both the Holocaust and the Battle of Budapest, which was an unbelievably and little known, incredibly destructive chapter at the end of the war.
Wow. But it's a death trip, and something comes alive, like something has to die. Something has, can we say like the little line underneath, like something has to die in order for, can we just do that for Tova? Something has to die in order for something to be born. Then I would
look, getting intimate and comfortable with death is getting comfortable with life.
I know.
There's no difference. And again, that sort of scientific materialism that I was brought up under has utterly shunned and separated us not only from death, but even from the aging process, right? Like, we're not allowed to be or look old. And so as a result, we have a culture with a lot of elderly people, but very few elders, very few people who can own and hold the wisdom that age does give you, right? We're a culture of elderly people trying to look and act young. And I know that's a gross oversimplification, but there's truth in it.
100%.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and I think how we sort of frame it to our body-mind clients that visit the show or will look at the YouTube. So you did some various you had various experiences, allowing these plant supplements to
in this world people call them medicines. No one calls them drugs.
To heal you and bring you closer to what you needed in order to integrate your past into your present and have a future. But you still have shame and fear and anxiety, but this is what I say, like, it's a different relationship. You were able to change your relationship with, no one's getting rid of any emotions. We're not getting rid of anything here. We are embracing, we are like falling in love with, we are accepting I always love the 12-step theory. Like, you got to accept it first. And then if you want to change it, you can change it. But first you got to dance with it. You got to be one with it. And then you can do whatever you want with it. Then, because guess what? The Matrix, you're in control by letting go.
And look, there's no way out but through. Again, that's lawfulness, right? I didn't make that up.
Yeah.
That's what I know.
Yeah. So tell me now that you're in this healing journey, which is linear, not linear, but it's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's just ongoing. What do you do with your guilt and your fear and your anxiety? How do you sit with it? How do you have coffee with your fear? How do you understand? Because you're still the same person. I mean, you've evolved.
Yeah.
I have to say this all the time. I have a good friend who he translated the Joe Dispenza books into Hebrew. He's an NLP coach. He's a great guy. And he has a broadcast called Evolve or Die. I think it's profound.
That's
to
good.
really evolve or die. And basically you evolved and you're still Seth. See, we're not, you didn't lose your identity. You accepted your identity and you healed pain and anxiety.
So here I'd say a lot of things about that. I actually say at one point in the book, I think during, there's that long ayahuasca journey that's kind of the heart of the book. And at one point, I remark in deep despair that what I hope would happen was that I would just drink the potion and wake up someone else. And that's not what's happening. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. And what that forced was a reckoning with the parts of myself I didn't like, which at that point was essentially all of me. And being in a different relationship to it. And I think what happens now, especially after I was just ruminating on this morning, when I came back from Hungary, I spent a month in Hungary 5 years ago. When I came back, I felt battered. I felt way more anxious and way more troubled than I had when I left. And
even after all the plant experiences.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. And this is what I tell people. Again, as I remarked earlier, like this is not going to stop anxiety, but you're going to be able to relate to it and be in conversation with it. As you said, dance with it or have coffee with it. So when I came back from that trip, I felt battered. I felt as though I had really walked into the jaws of death because I had gone to a country that deeply, deeply rejected on an existential level my family. It had tried to kill them. Hungary's anti-Semitism is far more covert than it was, and I would argue no less intense or no less institutional than it ever was. And it was really interesting for me as a white American male to go to someplace and realize other people had already made their minds up about what I was without my having opened my mouth. And that was very humbling.
Yeah. Wow.
That trip brought me into close confrontation with those ancestral memories and those stories, which were far worse and more traumatic than I had even given credit for, with institutional anti-Semitism, with the destruction of our climate, which was something that I had not allowed myself to be in contact with. So I felt deeply traumatized when I came back. But here's the thing. Challenging experiences are not bad. There was nothing wrong or misguided about what happened. That was just the necessary step for me to be in closer contact with these things and relate to them in a different way. And so you ask, what do I do with them now, with those feelings of guilt or shame or unworthiness or unbelonging that still arise? Absolutely. It can feel some days like a minute-to-minute conversation. It still does. However, I know how to have that conversation now, and I know how to stay at the table, and I know in my own experience and in my own body how to look beneath the surface So what's the emotion behind that, right? I'm having this thought that I don't belong, or name it, my book won't find its way into the right hands, or X or Y will happen or not happen. Okay, so what's the feeling behind there, and where is that located in my body? And
Beautiful.
that's just a very simple and yet, as you know, very effective way to bring it back to the self, to bring it back to the body. And again, no separation between physical symptoms and emotional ones. It's all the same. And also to ground, to put my feet on the ground and say, I'm here right now. What happens in the future is not up to me. What happened in the past was the past. It had to happen. So where am I now? And how do I relate to it? And how do I welcome it in so I can get on with it?
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking of all my clients that, are going to benefit from these, from some of these simple words. But and I'm sure that you're meeting people too, that, like you said, you want to help people have to be at their own level. They have to be at their own. I have no idea in the shoes of someone else. No idea the shoes of someone else. And so.
No, I mean, others have said, and I would second, once you get beneath the surface, the appearances and the masks that we all put on to get through the day, we're all of us adults, actually kids, walking around in adult suits.
Yeah. And Seth, I must say, on the record, that people that, I say this all the time, and everyone I meet, people that will go into the space of mind body or understanding the conscious, unconscious, who are searching, who are struggling with all sorts of diseases and symptoms, majority, maybe even everyone, the more the sensitive people, the more self-reflective people, the more sensitive. I call the strong is the new sensitive. Sensitive is the new strong. These are the people with good intentions. These are people with hearts. These are people with that other people. They're different. There are certain personalities like you, and I think I and Michael Galinsky, and that will bump up against this kind of stuff. And all these coaches that have been through pain or anxiety become coaches because they have this great need now. So we're a certain kind of tribe that will want to maybe consider, meeting the monster under the bed and, do a psychedelic, or because we're searching, we're looking for something. And I think what we have to acknowledge who we are in order to even heal. Like, you had to acknowledge that you wanted to find some freedom. You didn't want to escape. You weren't escaping. You were with your feelings. You were really hanging out with your feelings, but you felt imprisoned, and you didn't give up. And this is a message for our listeners. Whatever it takes to know that this is not, I don't even believe in the word cure. It's a process. Cure is death. Cure is, I don't even
That is the cure.
Yeah. And, right. So I guess what I'm trying to say is to talk about the strength of people who face the decision to want to heal themselves and do whatever they need to do, and to be loving and gentle and patient and trusting. And they're not a victim of their body. Pain and anxiety is a protector.
Yeah. And I also want to say too, all my life I was a victim of perfectionism, and for good reason. I believe I can trace that to my father and the challenges of staying alive as a Jew in Budapest in 1944 and 1945, which were extreme. However, one of the things that implanted in me was this belief that everything had to be sort of set a certain way before I could advance or before I could feel okay. And there's a moment, this is a spoiler, but the very end of the book, I co-organized a live event in Portland called Judaism and the Psychedelic Renaissance, which is a one-day conference with speakers, presenters, meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And I presented on the book at the first conference a few years ago, and there was a Q&A afterwards. And the last question I took, I'm so glad I did, woman asked, "Are you cured?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Did the psychedelics cure you?
Right.
She asked. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I said is essentially, look, I'm probably neurotic by anyone's estimation. I'm self-absorbed. I'm anxious. I'm weird.
Sensitive, loving, grateful, gracious.
But here's the thing. I'm engaged in my life. And before this, I was not. I was hiding from it. So in all my imperfection, I helped create this conference to bring people together. I wrote a book about my experiences. Every day I'm communing with people like you about the gifts of these experiences. So did they cure me? Yeah, absolutely they did. And it's a process that will continue until I die.
Yeah. It's called curing, a curing experience.
A slow cure.
Yeah. Wow. We could meet weekly and talk about tons of topics. Yeah, really, we have so much in common. I mean, Seth, I could go back to my childhood and really find some real skeletons, I'm sure. My grandparents came from Volozhin in Lithuania, and they never even talked about, they didn't talk about anything going on. They didn't talk. And because I was a girl, they didn't talk even more because you're a girl,
Oh, yeah.
And so I can't imagine what I don't know if I'm brave enough, but that's okay. I'm brave enough just to say it is what it is. I'm managing. I'm working on my intergenerational trauma, my daughters and I. But I'm so thrilled to be a bridge to bring to listeners and to, have you on my Facebook and to share with you with Michael Galinsky, who's so boasting about this book, and to draw, because he says that Dr. Sarno was the first trauma-informed therapist. He says it over and over again, rather than Gabriel Maté being it. Gabriel Maté, and Gabriel Maté is actually really anti-Semitist anyway. He hates Jews. Gabriel Maté.
Gabor was born, so at the end of the book,
in Hungary. His mother.
I described the Budapest ghetto. He was born there.
Wow, that's right. He talks about his mother. But he really, really hates Jews. I was promoting this book a few years ago, and people wrote me and said, "How dare you?" That's kind of and I was just I'm just a bridge. And I just thought, you know what? And then I saw him talk lately, and I thought, I don't need to promote him because look, it is what it is. I might have an opinion, but I don't need to have a war over it. I can just say we can disagree. I mean, this is my world, and I'm, peace, love. I mean, whatever. War is a terrible, terrible, terrible way to work out your differences. It's sick. And you know what? It's history, and it's repeating itself, and it will continue. And I can't even imagine my grandchildren.
Yeah.
But here we are in this loving space in my studio, which is a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that peace and love will persevere. It will reign. Peace will come again. It's the cycle. It's in The Lion King, it's the cycle. It's the circle. And I really will burn a bra and hang a flag for peace, love, and Woodstock. I'm just not going to go on the highway, because I really don't like conflict. I'm actually good at creating it, but I don't like it. And I think what we all have to understand is really the potential conflict that will be in many of us who are sensitive people and who are, coming from more traumatic backgrounds. And how do we not be a victim of our past? How do we be a victor? How do we turn that into, and I've been, since the war, I've been meeting people and I'm waiting, and everyone's willing to come in my studio, and no one's being, oh, because you're in Israel. And people are being very kind and loving.
Yeah.
And so I see the world as a beautiful place. I'll always be a bit naive, and I'm not going to change that. I'll just kind of be naive with my eyes open.
Yeah.
And I think for you to be in this loving place of witnessing so much violence and whatever I didn't read that part of the book yet, and I imagine, I can't even imagine, your father being involved and your mother, and you're coming out of this like, hey, I was violent. You were violent to yourself. You were beating up yourself, and you were not, doing that to your wife and to your child. You were it was self-abuse, and you were like, wait a minute, I can grow and not be bullying myself.
Yeah,
I can.
on the sustainable path.
Yeah. So, and love is not weak, and awareness is not weak, and crying is not weak. I mean, real men cry, so all of this has come out, in this book. And, it's like Death Trip, finding yourself, looking at the man in the mirror, says Michael Jackson, so I really think that whatever it takes for people to find themselves, I don't care what you're smoking or what you're popping, if it brings you to yourself and you're like what I call naked with your clothes on, being able to really love yourself, even the part of you don't love. Can you love the part of you abuse? Can you love, nowadays I think they do this in therapy. I'm not a trauma therapist, but how does the person who gets raped, God forbid, live again? And they don't have to forgive the person who did the terrible thing, but they have to somehow come to terms with something. And you did that. You came to terms with you.
Well, what that process did is I think of the notion of things being personal, as in these things were done to me or to my family or to my people, and there was intent behind them. And of course, that's true on one level. It absolutely is. Like, perpetrators do have bad intent, and they act upon them. But I lived my whole life feeling like everything that happened to me outside in the world was personal, and it was aimed at me. And it reinforced a kind of self-centeredness and a homing towards victimhood.
Yeah.
That is incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Enneagram?
Yeah.
Okay.
We just talked about that. Yeah, it's very much part of my field, but yeah.
So I need to find it here, but the Portland, the press that put out the book is a Portland micropress, a tiny publisher that I'm involved with. And next week there's an event with an author who also describes himself as, I think, an Enneagram consultant. He's a brilliant writer, and the conversations around the Enneagram are utterly transformative. It's a little bit like therapy meets channeling or psychic work in some way. And it's also very grounded and very beautiful. And I just want to read. So we're doing this event with him next week, which will be a live event. Like, he's going to talk about the Enneagram and then invite people, like, what's going on in your life? What's a conflict you're having with someone? Let's look at that through the lens of the Enneagram. And I often compare the Enneagram with psychedelics, actually, because they're both these utterly impersonal systems through which to observe our ingrained habits and our patterns, and to actually say, oh, there's a reason we're doing this, and it's not what I thought it was, and maybe there's a different way to relate to it. But I just want to read something that, his name is Jacob Rubin, and I want to read something that he wrote about about the Enneagram. This was just published in the Paris Review a few days ago.
Beautiful.
He writes this essay, and I can share the link, about the Enneagram and how and the impact it's had on his own life. And he uses the metaphor of seeing stained glass in a church. To return to the image of stained glass, working with the Enneagram often means finding new stencils in the mosaic of our lives for the colors that already stream inside us. I'm moved by this model because it takes seriously how scary the process of being alive can be and how possible.
Wow.
And I thought that was such a beautiful way of framing facing our fears and facing the things that we think are keeping us from our lives, and realizing that they're actually the portals through which we must pass to get to our lives.
What a beautiful way to say goodbye and open up such inspiration for me and for our listeners. And I would like to meet again. I say that to everyone, but I really would like to meet you again and, talk about the death and the rebirth, because I don't know if there'll be a sequel, but I know that me and you are going to have a sequel, but you're not done yet doing your therapy work. You've just begun. You've just begun. And I think we should go into business together and heal people from chronic pain and disease, because it's when people get better at feeling, they just feel better. When people face their fears, they see that all it was just a thought, and their thoughts can't always be trusted. And, so to be continued. I just so appreciate your sharing with me. And like I said, I'm not an expert on the topic of trauma, but I feel like I was able to dialogue with you, and I didn't interrupt too much, because it was just so you're really like, you were just, you understood about the dialogue. Like but you have so much to say. I could listen to you all night, really. And I just want to share this book. I've been sharing it all over on my Facebook and on my profile. I think it could look a little bit like weird, and I think people want to open it up. It's beautifully written. You're a natural author, just a natural author and a natural speaker. And I think you already are doing therapy. You already are your own doctor, the doctor in you, the doctor and therapist in you. And I appreciate this little session in my studio. Thank you for bringing your pixie dust and dropping it here.
Thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, I really. And if anybody needs to talk to you or wants to talk to you, you're there. You're on social media in a really beautiful way, really sweet, gentle way on social media. And well, if I can ever help anyone in your life, we can partner together. We can maybe have a group. We can, we'll meet again. Remember this face. Okay, thank you so much, Seth. Good night. God bless to everyone.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay, 1 second.